All right, we are in Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18 this morning. So for the last few years, I've been trying to spend some time and ask community leaders such as the Tumwater mayor and Jay Mason, the commander of the Tumwater Police Department. I've been trying to talk with them and just sort of pick their brain on what their view of a community looks like. Trying to figure out how we as Tumwater Baptist Church can reach in and join, and which elements of community can we be a part of. One of those has been this Tumwater Night Out. We've also done some other things as we're trying to serve the community. And I've just been trying to get an idea of, hey, what is community? Is community is a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. There's something that brings together that community. A community is a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. And another definition is a group of interdependent organisms, I always love these ones, of different species growing or living together in a specified habitat. For example, if you have a pet, and that pet is living inside your house, that pet is part of your community, for better or for worse, okay? Just saying. There is usually something that brings together people, and if we think about it, we have have you ever thought about all the communities you share with different people? Your neighborhood, your neighbors, you're living in a common area, your family. We share a community of people who need electricity. You share a common space with people on your street. Some of you have a community, some of you exercise and share commonality with insane people who get up early every morning and work out. Communities are a regular part of our lives. Even people who want to be left alone form communities of other people who want to be left alone, like monks. We form communities with nature, technology, and people. It is a part of who we are. Our church has tried to focus on three specific communities. One is our corporate community. One is our little smaller groups of community groups that we have and we meet throughout the week, and our community as a family. All a part of our common community of the Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater area. Communities make an impact on us. They define us, and we define them. Now, does Jesus have anything to say about one of the most influential communities over the last 2,000 years? A community that has built hospitals, rescued millions from slavery, addictions, ran rehab programs, fed the homeless. It's the community of the church. The title of this week's message is Pillars of a Kingdom Community. Before the historical universal church was established on the day of Pentecost, Jesus was still working with his disciples and trying to lay a foundation of a community built upon his future work on the cross. Matthew, one of his disciples, brings some of these teachings together to help his listeners, who are now a part of a community. They are part of, we are 12 disciples, Jesus called to help them. Okay, so you guys know, right? They're part of a little community that had formed. And Jesus began to teach this group of disciples these foundational pillars that should identify the church. And these pillars should function in a way that they should be a shared commonality amongst Christians. So we're in Matthew chapter 18. And for those who have been in the church and they have been churched, especially in Baptist and or traditional places, this is a very familiar passage to you. It is a passage that talks about church discipline and how to handle things like that. So Matthew chapter 18, verse 15 says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. If he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and tax collector. And I want to say, before I keep reading it, when you see the term church there, the church had not been established and had not been formed yet. And so that term literally means gathering. When you bring it before the gathering or the collection or the community of people, the people who share the same ideal. He says, verse 18, he says, truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again I say to you, if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them. So we take a step back, and what we see about these verses, because when we think about it, they seem to all be talking about something a little bit different. You have, this sort of discipline part, and you sort of have this part about praying, and you have this part about gathered in my name. If we take a step back from these, what happens is the thread of commonality that exists between these two, the community of these verses, is that Jesus is helping us see important aspects that his people, his kingdom, and the future church needs to establish in their communities. And the first one is an accountable community, and that is in verses 15, 16, and 17. Now, before we get to what Jesus is saying here, all right, I want to, a lot of times we can just jump right in, it's in our bylaws, it's in our discussions, but in their minds, they didn't have church bylaws yet. Nothing had been written. What is going through the disciples' mind when Jesus starts talking about coming together, dealing with it, and bringing before the community or the gathering? Well, in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verses 15 through 21, is this legal dialogue, this legal explanation that Moses gives the nation of Israel. So this is Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 21. You guys can check it out. But he says, a single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. Meaning, if one person comes up and says, I saw them do it, and no one else saw them, they are not supposed to listen. They didn't have iPhones or they could video it, or street cameras. They had to depend upon the word of another. And sometimes, as you guys can imagine, people are not the most truthful, are they? Especially when money is on the line. And so the idea is only when 2 or more witnesses shall a charge even be established or accepted before you even look at it. See, if a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. And that was when the disciples heard of disciplining and this, when 2 or more are gathered, this is what comes to their mind. Jesus is evoking some legal terms in regards to this community. Church discipline or community discipline needs to be done as well as legal proceedings. It is not supposed to be done lightly. When accusations are made against other brothers, there needs to be a level of accountability and severity that is done. There needs to be a level of seriousness that takes place when a church does this. See, there's a couple of things that he also brings out, because a lot of times when we think of this passage in Matthew chapter 18, this is how it's usually presented. All right, so if one person has a problem, he tells that person, hey, you're a jerk. I got a problem. If they're like, deal with it. Then you got to bring more people in with you. So you got to gossip to your neighbors. You got to tell them, man, this person's such a jerk to me. Oh, man, really? Let's go get him. And then 3 people now say, you're a jerk. And he's like, you're dumb. And then they gossip to the whole church, and then they get the whole church to go behind him. And that's oftentimes how this is sort of communicated. Whoever speaks first has the upper hand. Whoever makes that first accusation gets it. But if we're approaching this from a legal matter, this thing has to be established between 2 or more. And so if there is a problem between 2 people, it can't be, I'm going to go and I'm going to gossip a bunch and leave out some of the bad information, and do that and get a few of my friends here, and we're going to go let this person have it. But it's supposed to be done in a very accountable way, where 2 or 3 others, they go and they sit and they listen and they're like, yeah, I don't think that's a problem. Or both of you guys just need to grow up. Seriously, both of you guys. Just listen to you guys. Shame on both of you guys. Or if it comes to the fact that, hey, there has been an accusation, the 2 or 3 listen to it and they're like, oh, that is a problem. And they turn to like, hey man, you gotta fix this. You gotta deal with this. They're like, no. All right, well, we'll come back next week. See if we can convince you. And they try and they reason. And eventually what happens is that person has a choice now. Are they going to deal with this or not? See, and so what Jesus has here, which I think is really cool. So in the process of this accountability with one another, he has created what I call a sibling mentality. You notice how he says, if your brother sins against you? This also includes sister, okay? But if your brother sins against you. Now, I know some of you guys have interesting relationships with your siblings, okay? But there is a connection of family that I think is actually really important. Sometimes our siblings drive us nuts, okay? I have one brother, love him to pieces. Sometimes I just want to bonk him on the head with a bat. It's serious, okay? But you know who the only person who could bonk my brother in the head with a bat would be? Because if anybody even dare tried it, I'm going to bonk him in the head with a bat. It's my brother. It's my family. And there were times where we got to talk. There were times I laid it out to him. And there were times, but there was always an approach with him that he was my brother. He was my homie. He was my home dog. He was my brother. And that bond was something very, very, very important. We stuck by each other through thick and thin. And that has to be mentality when it comes in us approaching people. We have to have a sibling mentality. And what that means is, look, there are some times where you don't have a relationship with somebody. And if you don't have a relationship with somebody, you should probably keep your mouth closed and not judge that individual until you get to know them. There has to be a family connection there. And as the church gets bigger, you can have people who sit on their high horses and they walk by and they like to judge and they like to, oh, I saw you did such and such. So naughty. No, maybe you should stop talking. Maybe the reason that mom showed up late to church was because, well, all 3 of her kids decided to synchronized boo-boo their pants. Maybe that's why they don't look all nice and organized. And maybe that's why they've been late today. So keep your judgment over there. And, if you really wanted to, the mom would probably hand off her poopy kid to you sometime and just say, enjoy, okay? There has to be a level there. So before, there needs to be a sibling mentality in regards to this accountability that we give ourselves. If you guys also notice, it says, if he listens, tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. So what is the goal of this? It is to gain your brother. It is to restore that relationship back. Because something has happened, something has happened that has broken that fellowship. That has broken that sibling relationship. And it needs to be dealt with. That's the goal. The goal is not to prove your point. The goal is not to be right. The goal is to gain your brother. I think that's important to learn, important to remember. The other one is this idea of fact-finding, which I think is very important. If you guys notice, he says, by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, it may be established. That is set out so we can see. It has to be established before other people. It cannot be done based on the voice of one alone. And I think this is an important aspect to it. Because, sometimes, you guys ever, sometimes we're tired and sleepy and grumpy and grouchy. And we're just like, leave me alone. Oh, they have sinned against me. They weren't very patient. Bring it before and you're like, that person was mean to me this Sunday. And they're like, dude, the person was sleepy. Toughen up. Okay? I think we can handle this. All right, there has to be established and it has to be there. And this is important. We cannot throw accusations and we cannot throw anything around because this is it's important. Now, I will say though, as if at any time it goes before somebody and there is, I'm trying to think, if you go before 2 or 3 witnesses and there is actual legal damage, you tell the police. I'm serious. If you tell me and someone's broken the law, not only am I required by law to tell the law that you've broken the law, but I'm going to do it. It's not a joke. So in-house sins and violations, if they are ever done and it is against the law, we are going to the police. And I will say, as a pastor, I have heard of too many pastors who try to keep the sexual abuse of minors in-house with verses like this. If I find out that it has happened, the community at large is not going to hide it. We're going to hand you over to the police, and we're just going to say, you can just, it's that serious, especially after what Leslie talked about last week. Okay? So I just want to say that if there needs to be fear in regards to that. If we catch you, yeah. But hopefully we don't have those issues. But it could happen. This last one, as I think is explained in verse 17, so we've seen, and for whatever reason, this action or this lifestyle or these choices that these people keep making they're creating damage. And the violation has gotten so bad where now not only the one person that says, hey, you're wrong, but the 2 or 3 have also said, dude, you're wrong. You got to fix this. You have to repent and change your ways, and goes, and the person's like, no, I don't want to. Then the herd has to maintain safety because that sheep is no longer a sheep, but that sheep has become a wolf. And the wolf is now damaging the family, and the church has to respond, the community has to respond and actually remove that person for the safety of the flock. And it's one of the hardest things to do for a church, but it needs to happen. So what does this tell us about the kingdom of Jesus? Okay, what does it tell us about a kingdom of Jesus followers? And are these verses telling us that we need to be nosy, that we need to be bossy and get in people's business? That we like to discipline people, because Baptists have been known for disciplining people and stuff. And no, okay. What Jesus is communicating here is a community of Jesus followers is a group of followers that are accountable to one another. We choose to be accountable for one giant reason, and that is to protect one another. In the flock, there is safety. See, a community isn't about you. A community is about us. And we have chosen to try and create a safe environment that allows the Holy Spirit to work and change us. We recognize that this takes time, it takes teaching truth, and it takes a very patient attitude. And we have committed to this. And sinning against each other puts that at jeopardy. And at times, we as the community must react. We are accountable to one another. And we are accountable before God to respond correctly to sin. This next one is in verse 18. He says, truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed. And some of you might be very familiar, loosed in heaven. Some of you might be familiar when Leslie preached on this, in like Matthew chapter 16, I think verse 19. He sort of explained it that Peter would have the authority to loose and to bind spiritual matters here on earth. And what this means is that Peter was given a level of authority that there's some areas that the Bible has no mention of. How do you go about it? And he's like, Peter, I need you to take care of these, okay? You're given that authority. But now he turns and he's given the same authority to all the disciples. And in a way, he's actually given it to the community at large, because he says, truly I say to you. Now, you sounds like it's singular, but English, for some reason, does not have a y'all. Except in certain parts of the country, okay? Amen, that's right, you and the, okay? So, but this you is a y'all. Truly, I say to y'all. Y'all. I'm going to keep saying y'all as much as I can today, okay? Whatever y'all bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. And whatever y'all loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Jesus is giving the same authority to his disciples, and as a result, the church and the community that is going to follow. He gives the church the ability to respond to things that aren't necessarily covered. And this is insane, because in the Old Testament, the first 5 books of the Bible, there is a massive amount of rules, laws, and regulations. Not only was it a religious document, there was a legal aspect, and there was just a general cultural aspect. Every facet of an Israelite's life was dictated and mandated, and Jesus is doing away with that now. But now there's a lot of messiness. We don't have all these rules and regulations now. So now what? I think this really communicates something really cool, that the community must be relevant, because things change. And the culture changes. And what a culture in China or Africa, another part of the country, what is right or wrong there might look a little bit different than here. We've also seen some changes where, did you guys know back in the day, some early churches would forbid baptism to actors in dramas? If you were involved in a drama, you were spoken out about it, because they believed that drama was deceptive. It was big, as in like, that was their form of movie theaters, okay, back in the day. Now, in some sense, we can understand them, because oftentimes nudity was a very common practice in some of those dramas. And I think we could say, it's probably best not to watch a bunch of nude people up on stage. I think we could, roughly agree with that. But things have changed nowadays. In the 1900s, the church actually made a very definitive change that actually encouraged the use of dramatic performances and plays and actions and stuff, as long as they communicated wholesome truth, et cetera, et cetera. It's changed. What happened? The church realized it wasn't as big of a deal now. And so they changed their mind. And so what had been originally bound had now been loosed. Okay? Another thing is, how many of you guys have played in some form with a deck of cards in the last 20 years? Okay, in 20 years. Come on, everybody, okay? If not, come over to my house, we'll play. I'll fix this, okay? Decks of cards were considered pagan and evil. Any form of anything on a card was forbidden. And actually, this was as recent as the 1850s. Okay? So one minister said that he would rather have his children play with a nest of rattlesnakes than with a deck of cards. Pretty dramatic. That is how much they were against it, okay? That was bound tight. That was taught. That was common practice. Well, what do we do now? We have cards and game nights at church. I guess we're playing with rattlesnakes. I don't know. I mean, it just happens. Now, I'm not going to sit here and make fun of those times, because in those times, they had definitive, legit reasons why they needed to make those stands. And many church leaders accepted those and looked at it and said, the cards or this or that definitively attaches ourselves to certain organizations. And pastors would issue caution with those. The same way I would issue caution to anybody who spends a regular amount of time in bars and clubs, maybe you should consider not doing that. Okay? I have no problem saying that, okay? In my mind, that is something that I have decided to bound and loose. And as the churches, they're relevant by how that changes and flows and fluctuates based on it. There are certain things in Scripture that the Bible has really, they've given us the wisdom to figure that out. And so what Jesus is saying here is one of the pillars of a group of Jesus followers is a level of relevancy in considering and thinking and binding and loosing things here on earth that have spiritual impact. It's given the church a pretty serious responsibility and something that we need to take seriously as we choose to live. That at times, a church will make stands and ask its members to make this stand with us, okay? And there's times where we're loose and it's okay, and that's something the church has to consider. So this one is relevancy. Now let's look at verse 19. Now he says, again, I say to you, if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. I love this verse because I bet two of us can agree on something. I think, okay? I'm pretty sure we can. And he says, again, if I say, if two of you, I mean literally, all right, two disciples, you guys both agree on this principle, and you pray and ask the Lord about it, it will be done. That sounds pretty cool. Paxton and I both agree that we should each be driving the brand new Ford F-150 Super Duty vehicles together. Paxton and I are going to pray about that together. Therefore, God is going to give it to us, right? Oh. Because he wants a Chevy or something weird, okay? I don't know. But is that what it's saying here, okay? No, and I think what prevents us from running off with that, because you totally know two of the disciples are like, sweet. We get $1 million? Split it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, he says, I think the next phrase are in my name. And I think verse 20 sort of continues with this, but we're going to use this to explain another point. But verse 2 says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name. And I think that is an important phrase to remember as we look at this whole thing. If two people gathered in the name of the Lord agree that something is a big deal and they pray it, then God is going to work in that. I cannot, in good conscience, especially after reading passages like, Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, having the mind of Christ, who God was willing to be a servant and became poor and went and died on the cross. I can't pray in good faith that I end up with the brand new Ford F-150 or a BMW. I can't. I think that's an important thing to remember. Again, it's still in light of what the Bible is saying here, but what this does for a community is I think it encourages a community of Jesus followers needs to be a praying community. And it's such a neat promise because he's saying if at least two of you agree on earth that this is something spiritually important and you pray and hand it to the Lord, then what Jesus is saying is my Father is promising to answer and to work in that prayer. Isn't that incredible? The God of the universe has promised if two of you are gathering together and are praying and offering petitions and requests before God that he is going to answer. You know what that means a community of Jesus followers should be doing more? Praying. And I know that many of you guys' groups, the community groups, etc., you guys are spending time in prayer every week. If you are not, for whatever reason, fix it. Pray every week. Think about what Jesus is saying here. Pray with a level of confidence. You know when you go together in prayer together that God is going to answer and work in that request. The Father hears and will answer you. But this leads to my next thing is For what are you praying? Because so often our prayer request can, and I want to say can, get sabotaged by numerous health requests. Because that's what's going on right now. And I'm not saying those aren't important. But what I'm saying is are you as a community agreeing and praying about bigger things? Such as spiritual growth and change in the lives of our church. That God would use our church or you or whoever in the lives of others. And that God would be encouraging holy living in our people. Are you praying for things that are beyond just your health needs? And I say that because, man, for the last 2 weeks, I loved knowing that people were praying for me in regards to my surgery. I really appreciated that. But in the grand scheme of things, there are bigger things than my tummy ache. There are. And we need to keep those in our minds. So during community group, I'm begging you guys, make sure you guys pray for some bigger things and agree. Because guess what God says he's going to do? He's going to answer them. Prayer should be a pillar of the community of Jesus followers. Now, the last one we're going to talk about here is actually in verse 20. He says, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them." And the last pillar is that a pillar of Jesus followers, the presence of Jesus. You guys might think this is a duh. But the thing is, a pillar of a church, a pillar of a group of people who claim to follow Jesus, Jesus has to be a part of that. And I know you guys are probably familiar with churches that have decided to lose their way where Jesus is an afterthought. What Jesus has done is twisted and claimed, or what Jesus has said in the Word is not talked about. There's this level of shame in regards to what Jesus talks about in his Word, and so we know of communities that sort of put aside the Jesus aspect of a Jesus community. Sort of weird. It happens. But Jesus has to be part of it because he says, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them." And the caveat is, if we are gathered in Jesus' name, he is there. He does not say if 2 moms are bringing their kids to the McDonald's play place for some peace and quiet. Some get away from me, child moments, okay? Which is completely okay. Let me tell you. Kids just drive you bonkers sometimes. He's not saying Jesus, what he's literally saying is you're not coming together with that mom in the name of Jesus. You're coming, to that place in the name of rest and relaxation for a few minutes, okay? Yes, Jesus is there, presence of the Holy Spirit, but it's a little different, all right, is what I'm trying to say. That there's an element of where 2 or more people have come together in the name of, which is in the power and authority, and it's ultimately in response to the gospel. And the gospel is what motivates us. And so this church community, what has happened is when we meet on a Sunday morning, because of what Jesus has done, in response to what Jesus has done, praying and thanking and worshiping Jesus who has done it, when we come together, the promise is that Jesus is there. Don't know where, but he's here. He is there. He is listening. That's cool and scary and cool. There's a neat, incredible realization that Jesus is there with that group. And the only way he can promise this, if you guys think about it, so he's telling his disciples this. Jesus, how can you be everywhere? Because there's a lot of gatherings. As you guys know, as the church grew, Jesus couldn't be everywhere. This implies that Jesus is going to die at one point because you can't physically be everywhere at once. You can't. Unless you're cut into little bitty pieces. So this implies that Jesus is saying, hey, one day I am going to not be here But spiritually, I am going to be with every single group or gathering in groups of 2s and 3s throughout the world who are gathered in my name. I am going to be there. And that is the fourth pillar. The presence of Jesus is a pillar of a community of Jesus followers. Now, some of you guys are going to meet in your community groups here this week. If not, I would encourage everybody. There are sheets in the back, community group sheets, where it's going to be talking about Matthew 18, 21 through 35. Due to time, I am not going to be speaking about this, but this one here is the fifth pillar. And that is a forgiving community. And that is conveyed in 21 through 35. And I'd encourage you to take one of those sheets and study that and discuss it. But that is the fifth pillar of a community of Jesus followers, is a group needs to be a forgiving community. A forgiven people needs to be a forgiving community. And that is the fifth pillar. As we've talked about, communities share many commonalities. These commonalities are so important that they bring together people who would never see each other ever. They bring them together. There is no reason I would ever talk with my neighbors unless they lived right next door to me. That's true. It wouldn't happen. The good news that Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins brings us together. It's the only reason I would be in the same room with Mark, as a Steve, as a Jim, as a Rita, as a Paxton. There's no reason for us to ever cross paths. There's really not. There's no way that Leslie and I would be working together if it wasn't for the church. I mean, if you guys go down the line, there's no reason. You guys are all pretty nice. You'd be pretty cool people. There's no reason we'd be hanging out together. Just wouldn't happen. Jesus is what brings us together. Our gospel communities need to be characterized by accountability towards one another, relevancy, prayer, and a recognition that the presence of Jesus is here. And the last one is forgiveness, which you guys are going to